What is up, you lovers of all things lock? I do hope you guys are having a beautiful Sunday. Welcome back to the Atreyu channel, where I discuss anything from lock care to lock repair. Be sure to hit that like button to help the channel continue to grow. And let's get right into today's topic. I got a question from one of you guys, as I do oftentimes, inquiring about palm rolling and wondering if it is possible to switch between palm rolling and interlocking. So can you start out palm rolling and then switch over to interlocking? Or can you start out interlocking and switch over to palm rolling? Can you go between the two? Today's video, I'm going to be answering that question and a little bit more. So let me first start out by talking about exactly what palm rolling is and what interlocking is. To me, palm rolling is a bit of a misnomer because I feel like when people say palm rolling, what they really mean is retwisting or tightening the roots, twisting the roots, retwisting the roots, however you want to put it. And palm rolling is actually what you're doing with the lock when it's between your palms, right? So in my opinion, you can retwist without palm rolling and you can palm roll without retwists. But for the purposes of this video, since the majority of people with locks seem to use palm rolling and retwisting interchangeably, please understand that when I say palm rolling, what I'm talking about is retwisting and palm rolling, that as a package deal. Now, palm rolling is essentially gathering the hair at your roots that you want to include in the lock, so all that new growth, twisting it, and then palm rolling to tighten. It's a way of gathering all of that hair so that it wraps around the lock at the root. Interlocking involves using a tool where essentially you are feeding your lock through the roots in different directions. The purpose of this is also to gather the hair, but the difference is that you're actually essentially tying knots in your locks, and that is kind of what leads to the lock look for interlocking. So when you interlock, it's kind of like a series of knots versus palm rolling, aka retwisting. That's kind of like just wrapping the hair around the lock, and eventually it will lock up with time. So now that we've discussed the differences between palm rolling and interlocking, let's talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of both. So starting with palm rolling, first let me just say that it is a quicker approach. So what that means is it would take me a lot less time to palm roll my hair than interlock it. Palm rolling is also easier to execute than interlocking. Palm rolling also leads to less bumpy and more cylindrical looking locks. And palm rolling helps to manage the frizz. Now that we've discussed some of the advantages of palm rolling, let's look at some of the disadvantages. First of all, if you do it too tightly, it can definitely lead to thinning. Depending on your hair type, when you use the palm rolling method, you might need some assistance from a product to actually keep the hairs together while it locks up. Also, more than likely, especially when you're first starting out, you're gonna need to use clips. One, to hold the twist in place, but also two, when you're palm rolling and you're wrapping that frizz around your lock while you're rolling, you're gonna need those clips to clip onto the lock to hold that frizz in place as well. All right, let's discuss some advantages of interlocking. First of all, and this is, in my opinion, its claim to fame, it is long lasting. So when you get your hair interlocked or you interlock your hair yourself, it will last a while. Some people get their hair interlocked every 6 weeks. Other people get their hair interlocked every 3 to 4 months. So yeah, it has the potential to last much longer than a standard palm roll, aka retwist. The interlocking method or approach is also applicable to any hair type. So an example would be, so for someone who wants to retwist their locks, maybe that retwist method wouldn't be as suitable for someone with a finer or wavier hair texture because it wouldn't stay in place. They would definitely be better suited with like a crochet hook method or rip and tear, things like that, back combing. But for that same person, they could utilize the interlocking method because once again, you're essentially just tying knots. So it works for all hair types. With the interlocking approach, you can get your hair wet so you can go swimming and there will be minimal disruption to those locks. You can work out as hard as you want, sweat your scalp out. Your parts will still be there with interlocking. For those of us who retwist, aka palm roll, you know that is definitely not the case. We're always worried about any sort of moisture getting to our roots because we know that fresh retwist is in imminent danger. Now, some disadvantages to interlocking is that it can be very time consuming. I've read that it can take 3 to 4 hours to interlock your head. Now, of course, it depends on how many locks you have, but that doesn't compare to doing a quick retwist, right? Also, when going with the interlocking approach, I would say it's a steep learning curve. You need to know exactly how to employ the technique or you're gonna mess up. Which leads me to the third disadvantage. If you do mess up, you could damage your locks. What I mean is you could end up with locks that have holes or gaps because you did not execute the method properly. So that's definitely a disadvantage, and there are many people who will attest to the fact that this can happen. You will end up with holes or gaps in your locks. 3 more disadvantages to interlocking. It creates smaller locks because you're tying knots. It naturally just results in a tighter lock. I mean, knots are tight, right? So it naturally results in a tighter lock. It also leads to a more braided look. Gives off a braided effect, which some will say doesn't really look like a lock. You know, that's not what a lock should look like. I'm not saying this, that's just what some people say. So if you want the traditional lock look, then maybe interlocking is not for you. And then lastly, it requires a tool of some sort. Now there are many different types of tools that people use when they interlock their hair. Some people use a latch hook. Other people use many other different types of tools. I've even seen people use safety pins, believe it or not. The point is though that it does require a tool. Whereas when you palm roll or retwist, you just need your palms. All right, now we arrive at the question. Is it safe to switch between both methods? In short, yes, it's definitely safe to switch between interlocking and palm rolling. That being said, you do run the risk of not having maybe as uniform a look as you would have hoped for if you had just stuck to one technique or the other. Let me give you an example. Say you started out retwisting, you got this nice thick lock, right? So that's, months worth of retwisting, aka palm rolling. But then all of a sudden you start to interlock. Okay, so see how it's definitely narrower? That's what I mean, that it won't be as uniform. Because the interlock leads to a much narrower, tighter look, there's going to be a noticeable girth difference. Now imagine you start retwisting again, and it's going to be like that, right? So you can have sections of your hair that are narrower and then plumper and then narrower again. And that's essentially what I mean by having a less uniform look as you go along the length of the lock. I will also say that if you're someone who happens to switch between the two techniques often, so maybe, 1 month you retwist for this section of the hair and then you interlock for a few months and then you retwist and then you interlock for a few months and you alternate it like that, then if you keep that pattern going, maybe the discrepancies along the length of the lock won't be that noticeable, and maybe it will actually lend itself to its own unique look. But I would say that it's definitely safe. You just need to make sure you know what you're doing. And that is true when you're employing any sort of hair technique. All right, so a couple of examples of people who I know use both techniques. The first one would be Kaya Journey. Look at her locks, they're long, they're beautiful. She's had them for years. And shout out to Keisha Adinkra, who's in the picture with Kaya Journey as well. Those two ladies hold a special place in my heart because in my earlier YouTuber days, they were making content right alongside me. Neither of them was really making much lock content these days, but we grew our locks together, we put out content together, so that bond is definitely there and will always be there. So shout out to you, K.A. Keisha Adinkra, and Kaya Journey. Also, Johnny Locs. I know that he will use retwisting or palm rolling and also interlocking as well. You can see in this picture that his hair obviously was retwisted. It just has that standard traditional retwist look, right? And then in these two pictures, you can see that his roots have definitely been interlocked. And he will go back and forth as well. It just depends on what he needs at any given point throughout the year. So it's definitely possible. It's definitely safe. Just make sure that if you're doing it yourself, you know what you're doing. Or if you're going to someone else, you make sure they know what they're doing. All right, so now's the time where you guys need to drop down below in the comment section and let me know which team you are on. Are you team palm roll? Are you team interlock? Or are you team INTERroll or PALMlock? Basically, that's the combination of both, meaning you switch between the two approaches. I'm very curious to know, so let me know in the comment section. If you choose to love, do so unconditionally, because loving with conditions the heart to not really love at all. So Atreyu is out.